Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Sānti's Wildlife Park. It is my current SANDBOX zoo here in Planet Zoo. Today we're going to be working on a plaza. The first thing I did was create the circular shape and size for the plaza itself, and then I attempted to fill it. However, to my demise, you cannot place buildings on paths that are already there. So we scratched that. And the first thing I want to do is start creating my buildings. My initial plan is 3 buildings, one for drinks, one for gifts, and one for snacks or food. So I start with 2 buildings here, 2 facilities, to help me create the building and figure out size. And I wanted to build it inside a quadrant because I knew I wanted 3, and I wanted enough room to be able to add all of the tables and awnings and decorations and floral and stuff like that. So we get started here with just some basic stone stuff, which doesn't end up sticking, but was mainly just to help me figure out size of the building itself and shape. And here I really struggled to fill up around the shop, forgetting that there is a specific wall piece that fits perfectly around the shop windows. So now that I've figured out what material I want to use, we go ahead and switch out the stone for that and rebuild. Now, I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted. I just knew that I wanted it to be slightly modern and slightly tropical looking. I played with the idea of having the power source up there with the solar panels. That being said, because it's in SANDBOX and I don't really need it, and I wanted to add washrooms into the building, I felt like I would have to really make the building bigger to be able to accommodate that, and I just didn't want to do it. So I removed the solar panels, we had the washrooms, changed it to red to match the color scheming of my current zoo, and we pushed forward. So at this exact point is when I realized that I wanted a tiered roof that supported some sort of floral in the front part. Now looking at it, I didn't feel that with the floral there, you could really see the roof, that it needed to be larger, so I switched it out for the full wall and added some mulch into the front portion. Now we're looking for signage, and as you can see, I chose to go with the 3 gulpies for the drinks. However, I felt like we needed to put the awnings in first to be able to really place the signage where it needed to be. I went with those initial awnings as they matched the awnings I used in the entrance of the park. However, I didn't feel that they really fit the style and image that I had in my head. Even though it wasn't very clear, I knew that it was wrong. Finding these African ones really felt like they fit with the materials that I used for the actual building, as well as more so the style that I had wanted in that original image in my head. So I go ahead and line between the buildings to give some additional detail and depth to the actual building itself. However, those will get changed because I did feel that they were a little plain and a little simple. So here I'm trying to figure out how we're going to line the flower bed. Now, I did like this piece of fence that I found. However, it didn't really fit anywhere for me to be able to use it at this point. So we go ahead and add those signs back in for the front, and we will add more around the buildings. But first, we're going to line around the vendors. I felt like it was still a little plain on the inside. There was a lot of the wood showing, and it just didn't feel right. So this is when I get the idea to switch out the logs that I had previously used to line between the buildings and go for something that had a little more details in it to really spruce up that front and give it some more detail. Now I'm going to be extending these above the building itself, which will help me create a fencing and a lining for the actual floral bed. I felt that if we used anything that was too dense, because it is a rooftop garden, that you wouldn't really get to see the floral as much if it had a full fencing in. So we're going to build a custom fence up there between the poles that we just used. So now we're back to trying to figure out how we're going to fill that space, as I still feel there's a little too much wood, and that not having anything surrounding those squares of the vendors is really just plain and looks unfinished. So I found these planks in the African set again. A lot of the decorations are from the African set. And I feel like they're plain enough that they're not distracting, but they do fill the area nicely and add those finishing touches to that section. So now we're going to start by creating a sign for the top of the building. And after watching several of Paulsley's videos, we're definitely going to make this sign a 3D sign by adding several different versions of the drink sign and adding the white in the back. Now we're going to slide it into place. Now we're going to adjust this a little bit after once I get the roof fixed out, but I didn't have a clear idea of how I was going to finish the top of that roof as of yet. So I just place it in the center as a placeholder and keep that together. And we're going to move forward. Now I fixed the mulch as it was completely level with the top, and I felt that was a little unrealistic, so we sank it a little bit. And now we're searching for the flowers, or floral I should say, to fill it up. So originally I was looking for floral that had the color variants in it so that I could select red to match the park. However, none of them were large enough or high enough that you'd actually be able to see them from the ground. Now the first set of green plants that we put in here were nice, and they size-wise and shape-wise they were perfect, but I felt like the color was a little dull and I wanted something that was a little brighter. So when I found these, I felt like it was perfect. They had a brightness to them that really fit well with the color scheming and the wood that we had already chosen for the walls, and I just felt like it would be very nice, simple yet predominant. So now back to the African theme again. We find this piece of wood that we're going to use to line most of the building. Now originally I had planned to use the same designed logs, African logs, that I had used to line between the vendors all around. However, then I felt like it was too much. So as you can see, I'm a little scatterbrained when I'm building this here, and the empty roof was really bothering me on the side, and so I had to look for some sort of decoration to fill it. So we went with I believe they're foxes. Now we're decorating the washroom. So we added the sign just to allocate that it is a washroom, and we're going to continue on with mapping out the edges of the building with the African piece of wood. Now the reason for doing that is I just feel like it gives it a polished look. There's no real need for most of this stuff. It's really all just decorative. So in the Asian theme, I found these large wooden beams, and so I use them to put in front of the washroom edges just to kind of polish it off. However, I did feel as though they needed to be moved outwards. They're a little sunken in right now, and I end up use them to line the washroom completely because I couldn't find anything else. As you can see here, I'm using some African pieces of wood, and I just didn't feel like it really fit. It was becoming too much, and I wanted to make it a little simpler since I knew there was a lot more signage that was going to be coming along all the edges of the building. And so we moved those out. However, then I realized that there's a space between it. So to fix that, I just doubled them up so that the space is gone. And I really feel like that was the best way to line the building, keep it simple for the washroom area, and keep it clean looking. So now we're going to go ahead with the medium-sized signs. And I keep this the same on all three buildings, as you'll see later on. So we go ahead with the medium signs, add them up. It's a little simple, so we add some of the floral signage that's there already pre-colored, because it has that depth to it instead of just having one flat color. So we add all of the different types of leaves Just very simple, nothing real planned, put it behind it. And I decide to use that same exact signage on the other side of the building. So now we're going to go ahead and fix up the rooftop garden. So we add a few beams just to make it seem like, there is some sort of fencing there to keep it held back. And we will add some on the sides as well. I just wasn't sure at that moment in time how exactly I was going to do that because of the difference in the lining in the front with the large logs and the lining in the back with the smaller beam. So we go ahead and continue lining the edges of the building. And in doing so, I'm left with this small awkward area above the washroom. And I didn't really like it. So I knew I had to fill it. So the first thing I thought of was to spell out toilets. It was basically the smallest way I could fit washroom or bathroom, etc. into words so that it would fit there. And luckily, without making it on the building, it ended up fitting perfectly. Now, the reason I do it on the grass all the time is because for me, it's the easiest way for me to ensure that they are flat and level with each other and not at a funny angle, and having to use the rotation on that and stuff. I find it difficult to rotate the writing at all, just because it's such a funny font, and when using X you can ensure that they're side by side, but having to rotate them, for me personally, I can never figure out if it's actually level or not, just because of how some letters are higher than others, etc. So for me, that's my simple solution, and I actually got that from Paulsley. So now I'm starting to figure out what I want to do with the roof, and I really like the idea of having a raised glass roof. So I went ahead and extended the corners up a little bit, and then once I placed the glass, I felt like it was a little unrealistic, and so we added a couple more beams on either side. And you'll see here now that the roof is done, I'm able to raise the drink sign just a tad, just to make it, more visible from the ground and really fill that space above the garden. Now, somehow part of our roof ended up getting deleted, which happens quite often for me, but we went ahead and we fixed that. And now we're working on this small back section. Now, I knew I wanted this to be like a staff area. We're not putting in a staff building or anything, so it's really just for show. But basically an area where realistically staff would walk in to get to work instead of just hopping over the counter. So I started with a small African door, and I spelt out staff, and I knew that staff was going to stay, but I wasn't sure about the door as of yet, and I was looking for some form of decoration to put beside the door when I found one of the East Asian double doors. And although it's in the East Asian pack, it's fairly, universal. I don't find it overly Asian themed. If you put it in an Asian building, it would look really well and it would fit really well. But I also found that it fit well with our, let's say, modern tropical building. So we went ahead and added that, and I really feel like that closed off that area. So I went ahead and added the larger signs to the back of the building, but I felt like it looked empty. There's a lot of space in the bottom left and a lot of space on the top right. So I was looking for something, and I was going to line up and down matching the pillars at the top, but I felt like that looked a little funny behind the signage. So the next thing I tried was some of the plain white signs, the trees and stuff. And again, it looked funny coming from behind the signs. So I altered the way I had the signs arranged. I remembered the look of the main entrance building you get with your zoo and all the animals that they have on the wall, and kind of replicated something similar to that, just as like a scenery piece on it. It's a little bit of detail, but it's also mute enough that it doesn't take away from the signage and stuff, especially at night, all the signage lights up. So again, we're lining part of the building. There's a lot of this, and I do it in parts because, one, I get annoyed of, just lining and lining and lining and lining. So I do it in parts, and it also allows me to, think a little creatively while I'm doing that for what I'm going to do next. So So that's the main reason why I do that in parts. Now, we all love lining circular areas. So this took me, a couple tries just to get right. The first time I did it, I tried to match the angles of the roof piece, because instead of being perfectly circle, it's kind of got, a few edges to it. However, the pieces I was using weren't quite big enough to make that work. And so when I came to the end, there was something off, and there was pieces fighting, with each other to be shown, especially with the white rings on it. So we went ahead and we corrected it a little bit by not trying to match that and just matching, the length of each piece until I got to the end. So of course we duplicated that and did it on the bottom, because there was no way I was going to try and do that again. Now, here we are with the finished building. So I realized that the front side of the roof was missing a lining at the top, so we fixed that. And now our building is officially done. So I ended up saving this building as a blueprint, because I realized that there was a few things that had been grouped together, and going through and ungrouping each individual piece so that I could group the whole thing together, it just wasn't working for me and I couldn't figure it out. So I went ahead and created a blueprint for it. Now here I am placing a second one, because as I mentioned, I wanted 3 buildings. And at this point, I wasn't feeling creative enough to create 2 whole other buildings, and I was really satisfied with the way this one looked. So I decided to just switch the signage out, switch the vendors out, and we would go ahead and use the same basic building shape for all 3. So I started by, making a sign that said food, which was going to house the 3 chief beef franchise vendors. However, once I put the word food up there, it just felt very small and like there was a lot of space. So I racked my brain a little bit and decided to go with snacks instead of the word food. And once I get it up there, you'll see that it really does make a difference. It fills out the area a lot more, and honestly, it just looks a lot better. So as you can see here, I'm fiddling with, getting that 3D look to it. So I like to line it up against the base of the building to ensure that it's even and that it's going to match the angle of that building. And then I go ahead and rotate it so that it's, the right direction and put it up on the building. So we switch out the drink signs for all the food signs, the small signs. And then we go ahead and switch out, the signage that we made for the side of the building using the medium signs. So I go ahead and remove the signs over there, and I try and replicate the same thing because I want, some sort of consistency between the buildings. I really want it to look like they're made to be in the same plaza. So once we get that on both sides, now it's time to switch the signs in the back. Now I didn't realize how large these signs really were when it came to the chief beef ones, because they all have that same logo and they're very large. It just made it a little bit more difficult for me to fit together, but I leave it there for now and we move on to building number 3. So same thing, I place it, I don't want it to add extra paths, so I move it a little further back, and we go ahead and remove the vendors, and we're going to switch them out for the gift shops. There's only the 3 gift shops so far, so we put those 3 in there. Hat's Fantastic, Looney Balloons, and Just a Momento. And we go ahead and create the sign for the roof. So this one is going to say gifts. I felt like it was moderately appropriate for the gift shop building. And it's a large enough word, like it takes up enough space on the building itself. So I was fairly happy with that sign. So again, we're fiddling with creating a 3D word. And we're going to rotate it, make sure it matches the angle of the building, flip it up, and go ahead and put it up against the roof. So again, we have to switch out these small signs above each vendor. So we have Hat's Fantastic, Just a Momento, and Looney Balloons. We go ahead and do that. Now we're going to be switching out the medium signage again. Again, it's a lot of repetition, especially because I wanted the 3 buildings to look the same. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate that and switch it over to the other side. And then replace the signage in the back. Now I had a little bit of trouble with this one just because I didn't realize the length, like up and down, of the Looney Balloons and Hats Fantastic. So I generally followed the same pattern for each one. The first one, the second one, and the third one matching the order that the vendors were in. However, in this one, I swapped Looney Balloons and Hats Fantastic just because I had the sun sign on there as part of decoration, and I really wanted that to be visible, and the Hats Fantastic sign was slightly shorter than the Looney Balloons one. So that is something that I did to just fix that issue. Now, as you can see, I rotated the buildings. Having 3 of them, I realized that I wanted the path to come out, extend from the circle as an X instead of, like a plus shape. And so we go ahead and rotate those, and I start working on the path. And this is where I ran into some trouble. So we're going to stop this one here, as there was hours upon hours of placing and removing path that just didn't work out. And we're going to post another video that has the final results of the plaza. So this one really is just the 3 buildings, they're in their place, it stops here, and we're going to come back with the plaza finished, the path down, and a little bit of explanation on how we finally did get the path to work, and etc. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for episode 5.